Hello, everybody. Welcome to Zone Defense. Be sure to follow us on Spotify at Zone Defense Podcast, on Twitter at Zone Defense Pod. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at Zone Defense Podcast. And be sure to ring that bell to get post notifications. All of our episodes are also now on Apple Podcasts. Today, I'm joined by Chris and Roman, and we will be doing our deep dive on the AFC South. How's it going, guys?
It's going pretty well today. This is a division that, I'm excited to talk to you guys about it, but I'm not really excited for it going into the season. I don't know. None of these teams really excite me a lot. There's one team that I may surprise a little bit with how high I am on them, but I really don't think they're going to have a lot of playoff success either. So this is kind of just a crapshoot division for me. But still, it's NFL football. It's coming up soon. Still excited to talk about it.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's some interesting pieces, some interesting moves that happen in the offseason. But when it comes to on-field production, this is kind of one of the it's kind of close to being one of the worst divisions in football.
I agree. 100% agree.
I agree with you guys there, but at the same time, this is a division that seems like they always produce at least one, obviously, but usually two playoff teams like they did last year with the Texans and the Titans, and both went reasonably far in the postseason. Titans made it all the way to the AFC Championship game. Were up early on the Chiefs, kind of choked down the stretch there. And the Texans, same thing. They were up huge on the Chiefs in the divisional round. So I kind of agree with you guys, but I still think that three of the four of these teams have a legitimate shot at making the playoffs and maybe making a little bit of noise like the Texans and Titans were able to do last year. But let's jump into the one team that I don't think has any chance at making the playoffs, and that's the Jacksonville Jaguars. This is possibly maybe the worst roster on paper out of any team in the NFL. I'm interested to see if you guys agree with that, but I tend to think it is. In terms of additions, they added Joe Schobert, linebacker, defensive end Rodney Gunter, tight end Tyler Eifert. They added defensive tackle Al Woods, but he did elect to opt out, as well as cornerback Rashawn Melvin, quarterback Mike Lennon, like linebacker Aaron Lynch, defensive end Cassius Marsh, defensive tackle Timmy Jerrigan, cornerback Tremaine Brock, and defensive end Adam Gotsis. It's a cool name. In terms of subtractions, they lost quarterback Nick Foles to the Bears, defensive end Calais Campbell to the Ravens, cornerback A.J. Bouye to the Broncos, offensive tackle Cedric Ogbuehi to the Seahawks, wide receiver Marquise Lee to the Patriots, tight end Nick O'Leary to the Raiders, tight end Seth DeVal to the Panthers, and linebacker Jake Ryan to the Ravens. In the draft, they kind of surprised some people, at least based on the mocks that I saw, by taking C.J. Henderson with the 9th overall pick in the first round. But they had 2 first-round picks, and with the 20th overall pick, they took Kayvon Chason, defensive end at LSU, which I think was kind of a steal because he was projected to go a little bit higher than that. In the second round, they took Laviska Shenault, wide receiver out of Colorado, another kind of guy that I saw possibly being in the first round. And then the third round, they took Devon Hamilton, defensive tackle out of Ohio State. As I said, this is probably the worst team in the division, so maybe you guys are just really in on the Jaguars and will completely surprise me and predict them to make the playoffs, but I tend to believe that they are probably the worst team in this division. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I absolutely think this is going to be one of the worst teams in football and the clear 4th best team in this division. You just lose. You look at all those names on the defensive end they lost. Calais Campbell, one of the best defensive ends in the league, he's gone. A.J. Bouye, gone. Even though we didn't have him on the list, Jalen Ramsey also gone. So, and then Yannick Ngakoue is also probably on his way out. So, that's 4 probably top 25 defensive players right there, all going to be out the door by the end, or already out the door by the end of the season. So, you just look at that; it's impossible to replace all that, and their offense isn't even remotely close to good enough to make up for it either. So, this is when you incorporate all that, this is going to be one of the worst teams in football.
Yeah, I completely agree. You can already mark them down as the first overall pick in next year's draft. You could tell by their moves over the past couple of seasons after their one-year wonder in 2017, 2018 that they were clearly in a rebuild mode. They literally traded every valuable defensive piece on that team, and you can clearly see that they're not made to win now, and you can mark them down to get Trevor Lawrence, I believe.
Yeah, that's going to be a big storyline all year. Is even if they do end up going 2-14, 3-13, like it sounds like we all expect him to do, if Gardner Minshew shows signs of being a quality quarterback, it'll be interesting to see if they do end up getting that first overall pick. If they do still take Trevor Lawrence, maybe try to trade Minshew. Who knows? That'll be interesting to see. But yeah, this was a team that was 6-10 last year, and they literally lost pretty much every notable name on their team. I feel like, and their top addition was maybe Mike Lennon or Tyler Eifert, maybe. I mean, that's not a great offseason. They're definitely a young team, and I don't think they're going to be as entertaining as like the Panthers or some of these other like bottom-feeding teams that are going to end up finishing fourth, or even the Bengals as well. But I still think there's like the Minshew will be interesting to watch. DJ Chark will be fun to watch. I think Leonard Fournette is going to get a ton of touches. I don't tend to think he's going to be a monster. I think he's going to have a monster season. I don't think he's a monster talent in this league, but I still think he's going to have a really good season because you got to give the ball to somebody, right? And if Fournette can stay healthy, I think he's going to have a really, really decent season, at least statistically speaking. But this was a team that are off, like you mentioned, Roman, back when their team was good a couple seasons ago and somehow made it to the AFC Championship game and was ridiculously close to making it to the Super Bowl. Their offense still was kind of a question mark. So now the offense is even worse somehow, and the defense is just as bad now, even though it was an elite unit a couple years ago. So I wouldn't chalk them up right now for the first overall pick. I think there's a couple other teams that might be worse than them, but yeah, they're definitely going to be a top 3, top 4 in next year's draft for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that, Drew. They're definitely a locked and loaded top 4 or bottom 4 team in the league. I don't know for sure if they're going to be the worst team in the league because they do still have a little bit of talent. You never know. Gardner could have a little magic. Maybe they win a couple extra games. He should throw for a lot of yards this year. I don't think he's going to be the quarterback next year because most likely we're going to draft a new quarterback. But I do expect them to let him air it out a lot this year. And I mean, he's got a couple decent weapons down the field. DJ Chark, Chris Conley's also a pretty good deep threat as well. So, I mean, if you throw to those two guys enough, something might happen. As for Leonard Fournette, I mean, Drew definitely knows my stance on Leonard Fournette. I think he is a very overrated running back, a guy that is his entire career has been, well, somebody's got to get the ball. So I think that's going to continue this year. And I don't believe he's going to get a starting job after this year because, I mean, you saw what they were trying to do. They were trying to trade him for basically peanuts, and, I mean, they couldn't even get any takers for that. So, I mean, you can see how much Fournette really means to this organization. If anyone offers them even a trade for just about anything this year, he's probably going to be out the door. So, I mean, you have to factor that in as well. I could definitely see him being traded at some point.
Yeah, even if it doesn't get traded, we all know that it'll be a huge offseason for running backs. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Jaguars went in a different direction because there's plenty of better talent out on the market.
Yeah, because like you said, Chris, he is the classic empty calorie stat kind of guy. He puts up huge numbers, but really doesn't lead to anything. And he's going to demand a lot of money, though, because he does have some decent stats. And I think he's probably going to add to that this year because there really isn't a whole lot in that offense. But yeah, he's probably his last year in Jacksonville. I just go back to, though, that was the same draft where they passed on Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes to take Leonard Fournette. So I know everyone likes to talk about how the Bears took Trubisky over Mahomes and Watson, but I mean, taking Fournette over Mahomes and Watson too, because you're like, hey, I like Blake Bortles, we're safe here. It's not great, but I hope that Jacksonville still at least watchable. I like Minshew. I think if Jacksonville ends up not getting the first overall pick and misses out on Lawrence, I think they'll still be good to go with Minshew. But the offense too, I mean, you mentioned it there. The wide receiver room isn't awful. I mean, Chark, Conley, Westbrook, they don't really have that clear-cut number one guy, in my opinion. I know, Chris, you're super high on DJ Chark, but and even Tyler Eifert, if he can stay healthy, he's not a terrible tight end. So I think they're going to put up some points this year. It's surprisingly, it's actually defensively where I kind of have more concerns because of how much they lost.
Yeah, it's crazy that they went from being an actually like a really elite group on defense to being just horrible in a couple of years. It's really crazy to see how much the downfall. I mean, they still have Josh Allen and Ngakoue for now, and Miles Jack as well. But besides that, it's really a whole new defense. I mean, C.J. Henderson. I mean, it may be a little bit of a reach, but I do really like C.J. Henderson. I think he's a really well-rounded corner, just besides a little bit of tackling struggle in college. Besides that, I think he's going to be a really good corner. So, I mean, that could be the Jalen Ramsey replacement. I'm not projecting it, but you never know. I think Henderson's a talented enough player to kind of break out in the league early and be a pretty good corner.
Yeah, they definitely hit those weak spots in the draft. They needed a corner. They got Henderson. They needed an edge. They got Chase on. And I do think a couple years ago they drafted Josh Allen. That was a great pick for them. I thought he would go a little earlier than that, but they were lucky he fell to them. And then 2 years ago, Taven Bryan, who hasn't necessarily panned out so far, but they're kind of hoping on him to be one of those key pieces as well, opposite of Chase on or along the line. So they had a good draft this year, and I think we'll see those dividends pay down the line.
Yeah, I think Henderson's more of a product. as a cornerback. He's not one of those guys where you can just throw him into a good defense and he'll be good right away. But I think that also works for this team's timeline because I think the potential is definitely there for Henderson to be really good. And I love the chase line pick too. I thought he was going to go higher than all the way down to pick 20. So overall, I mean, they did what they had to do. They weren't going to re-sign any of those guys. They're probably going to get something for Ngakoue as well. So definitely a team rebuilding. And it'll be, again, I think the best thing to see this year from this team will be development from Chark to see if he can maybe be a clear-cut number one receiver, and also to see if Minshew proves enough to maybe retain that number one quarterback job in Jacksonville and maybe kind of shoo away Trevor Lawrence. Because it's going to be pretty easy for him if he can help them win games and not get that first overall spot. I think it's very realistic that Minshew will be the quarterback in Jacksonville long-term because I thought he was pretty good last year.
He wasn't bad.
If you have anything else to add for Jacksonville, go ahead right now. But if not, we can probably jump into our fantasy picks.
I'll just touch up. Oh, go ahead, Ruben.
Like you said, Drew, I think the expectations for Jacksonville is really low. So I think it's going to be very easy for Minshew to maybe break those expectations and prove to people he deserves to be the starter.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that for sure. I think he's going to have a lot of help with I just kind of want to touch up on it a little more because I really like him. DJ Chark, going into his third year, I really think this is his time. This is kind of a make or break year for him. I think maybe not break, but he needs to take a step up from last year. Even I mean, he was really good last year, but you also have to factor in he scored a lot of touchdowns early in the season, and then he kind of fell off in the second half of the season. He needs to prove that he can be a dominant one in this league by staying healthy the whole year and being an impact player throughout the season, especially for this awful team. They're going to be behind a lot in games. He needs to be there for he really needs to be there for Gardner in terms of a true number one receiver, so they won't replace him in the draft, which is definitely also a possibility.
Yeah, I think just looking on paper though, I think that they're going to have enough if Minshew can deliver because we saw him last year was very limited sample size. So I think if he does enough, he does have decent enough weapons around him to score enough points and hopefully retain his job basically. But it's kind of weird because this is only his second year in the league, but he's kind of playing for his job, which typically you see when they take a rookie quarterback, they get at least a little leeway. But I guess he was a sixth round draft pick. So it wasn't, he wasn't part of their plan anyway. But yeah.
Very interesting personality for sure.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. He is very marketable too. So I think I think I'm a little bit higher on the potential for Minshew to stay as Jacksonville's number one quarterback long term, especially because they just got out of the Blake Bortles experience, and they're probably like extra cautious, and they're like, oh my God, we got this marketable, decent quarterback. Maybe they're more unwilling to kind of let him walk away. But yeah, I got to be honest, as we're kind of talking about this, I'm kind of a little more interested in the Jaguars than I was before this episode because their offense isn't awful. Like it's not good, but it's not awful. It's not the worst thing in the world. But Chris, how about you start off with your fantasy pick? I have a good feeling as to who it is, but how about you started us off with that?
Yeah, it's I was just talking about it's DJ Chark for me. I can't go away from my guy. I was able to get him in my fantasy draft. Now he's my wide receiver one, which I'm not too comfortable about that. But I think you should draft him feeling pretty confident he can finish as a high end wide receiver too. I think he's more of you draft him as a wide receiver 3. Maybe in the 5th, 6th round, but I really think he has a lot of upside as well. I think he could end up being a top 5 receiver. I mean, he proved it the first half of last year. I believe he was the wide receiver 6 through the first half of the season, which is a really good season. I mean, him and Gardner together were awesome, but he ran into a couple injury problems in the second half, and he kind of faltered a little bit. So you're really hoping for another kind of breakout, a mini breakout from his already big breakout from year 1 to 2. You're hoping for a little bit like just a little bit of increases all around the yard reception, touchdowns, receptions, just contested catch percentage, stuff like that. But if you can get that, I do believe he's talented enough to warrant at least wide receiver 2 numbers. But a guy that I really like to own in all of my fantasy leagues, and I'm very excited about him this year. I think he's the only real dog in town in terms of receivers.
I actually think when you draft Chark, he already has that high wide receiver 2 upside, and
yes.
I think he could possibly be a wide receiver 1 by the end of the year. But you're taking him also in the 5th, 6th round, so that's a perfect pick for me. If I can get maybe go running back heavy and then get Woods and Chark as my wide receivers, I would be so happy with that. I know we kind of said it already. Jacksonville is going to be down late. They're going to pass heavy late in games, so all that work is going to go to Chark, and they kind of developed that connection with Minshew towards the end of last season. So hopefully that continues.
Yeah, I agree with that.
as we've been saying this whole time, they're a decent offense. Not great, but not the worst thing in the world. And they're going to be down a lot in games because the defense is not what it used to be. So they're going to air the ball out a lot. And I think Chark, kind of where his draft price is at the moment, he's a definitely good pick. I don't feel super comfortable having him as my wide receiver 1 like you do currently, Chris.
No.
But he's a high-end, really good wide receiver 2 option. And that's actually why I tried trading for him, Chris, from your team. So I think so. I'll do my fantasy pick next. And it's going to be Leonard Fournette, just because I kind of already talked about it earlier. He is a huge stats guy. And even though I don't think he's a great real life running back, I still think he's going to put up enough stats, put up enough points. He's dropping a little bit in drafts. I know I've seen some drafts where he goes super high. But if you can get him as maybe your RB2, even sometimes your RB3 in some leagues, I think he's a really good option there. As long as he stays healthy, he's going to get you consistently 10 to 17 points, which is really good from an RB2, RB3. Yeah, I like him. I really like him. So I know he's not a great real life running back, but he's going to be a good fantasy option.
Yeah, Fournette for me, I don't know. I like him and in fantasy a little bit more than I do in real life. I think he's a very overrated running back, one of the weaker starting running backs in the NFL. But in terms of fantasy, like we said before, he's the only show in town on the ground. So he's going to get the ball a lot on the ground. He may lose a little receiving work to Chris Thompson, which has me a little bit worried about him after finishing as a back-end RB1 last year in PPR because he had, 100 targets last year, over 70 receptions. I don't think that's happening again. So I have a little bit more fear about that. I don't think he has the upside to be a running back 1 again this year, but he's one of those Le'Veon Bell type guys, maybe Melvin Gordon, who has a little bit more upside than him, but like a player in that range where he's going to be he's going to consistently bring you probably back-end RB2 values and finish the season as more of a higher-end RB2, maybe a top 15 back. That's kind of how I see him this year. A guy that it's not off my draft board, but how I feel about him in real life. I don't really want to watch him play football on my fantasy team, so I'm all right drafting some other guys.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm not totally avoiding him, but I would be comfortable as him as my flex or running back too. I know he doesn't have that breakaway speed, so he doesn't break as the opportunity to be the workhorse as we've seen the past couple of years, which I had him in my league last year, and he was just serviceable for me. And you have to remember that they do have Chris Thompson now, and he'll get a lot of that receiving work. So maybe just depends on what league you're in. If you're in a standard, maybe Fournette would be a better option than in PPR.
Yeah, that might be the case.
Oh, you jump into your pick, Rowan?
Yeah, you kind of took the 2 only big options from that team, but I'll talk about Gardner Minshew a little bit. He kind of was a pleasant surprise last season, kind of broke out, took Foles' job. That was an abysmal contract that the Jaguars gave him. Terrible mistake, but I think they'll be set with Minshew for this year at least, or and maybe in the future, we'll see. But if you want to go quarterback late, he'll definitely be there. I'm going to repeat myself several times. Draft quarterback late. There's plenty of options there, and Minshew should be there every single time. And whether you want to stream him or take him as your quarterback 1, he'll definitely put up some numbers. Probably late in games, may not produce at the start, but you'll definitely be happy with him on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, Gardner's definitely one of my favorite players. One of my favorite really late round quarterbacks to take a flyer on. Because I think he has a little bit of sneaky upside that people aren't really giving him credit for. Last year he ran for over 300 yards. He just didn't have any touchdowns. If he can get to 400 yards and a couple touchdowns, that's a very safe floor. He's going to give you an extra 4 points a week. So all he's got to do is throw for a touchdown or 2, and he's going to be a pretty decent quarterback for you. I could easily see him finishing inside the top 12 in terms of rankings at quarterback. I don't think like I said before, I don't think he's some super talented quarterback, but he's not bad, and he's good enough to get the job done. And I don't think he's going to turn the ball over a lot because he didn't last year. I think he's going to throw for a couple more touchdowns this year, hopefully, because he had some tough luck with that. This offense in general just couldn't really score touchdowns. Maybe they get in the red zone a little more and have some more success. So Gardner, a guy that's well outside the top 12 that I still like, and to reinforce Roman's what Roman was saying before, I absolutely am fine with taking him as my quarterback 1 if you just want to ignore the quarterback position.
You can probably get him undrafted too. Like he can just be a streaming option as well. And I think I agree with you guys completely. I think he is going to be a really good option, as we said throughout this. They're going to be down in games for sure. And they're going to air the ball out. And there's a lot of, even if the real life production isn't great for Minshew, I think he's still going to be a viable fantasy option because I don't really worry about Mike Lennon taking his job either. So for this season alone, I think Minshew could be a really good option as your quarterback one, and the draft price is basically zero, so you can get it for pretty much nothing. But yeah, I was gonna go with Minshew, honestly, Roman, but I decided to shake things up a little bit and go with Fournette. So I think all three of those are decent, viable fantasy options. But any final thoughts on Jacksonville before we jump into our next team?
Nah, I'm done talking about them for sure.
I got to be honest, though, I'm a little more intrigued by them just to see the Minshew Chark, what each guy does in their next year here. So, but yeah, definitely.
That's about it, though.
Yeah, probably the worst team in this division. I didn't fall in love with them that much. So we'll jump into our next team here, though, and it is the Indianapolis Colts. This is a team that I know, based on just little here and there conversations we've had, I think I'm a little bit higher on this team than a lot of other people are, but I might be wrong. They're a team that had the talent on paper last year to probably compete with the Super Bowl. But then, of course, Andrew Luck left. I think it was week 3 of the preseason, and then they threw Jacoby Brissett in there. He was decent at the beginning of the season, and he kind of fell apart there down the stretch. So, but the talent is still there, and they made obviously a huge acquisition at quarterback in Phillip Rivers. And in my opinion, they're probably the best team in this division. But once I kind of go through these additions and subtractions, it'll be interesting to see what you guys think about this team. But in terms of additions, they added, like I said, quarterback Phillip Rivers, defensive tackle DeForest Buckner, cornerback Xavier Rhodes, defensive tackle Sheldon Day, fullback Roosevelt Nix, tight end Trey Burton, and safety Tavon Wilson. And subtractions, they lost actually quite a bit of guys. Tight end Eric Ebron to the Steelers, safety Quincy Wilson to the Jets, cornerback Peter Desir also to the Jets, wide receiver Devin Funchess to the Packers, and I believe he opted out of the season anyway. Offensive tackle Joe Haig to the Buccaneers, defensive end Margus Hunt to the Saints, quarterback Brian Hoyer to the Patriots, wide receiver Chester Rogers to the Dolphins, wide receiver Dontrell Inman to the Washington football team. They elect not to resign defensive end Jabal Sherrard or Adam Vinatieri, and linebacker Sky Moore, cornerback Marvell Tell, and safety Roland Milligan all opted out of the season for this year. In terms of the draft, they did not have a first round pick, but they had 2 second-round picks. They took Michael Pittman Jr., the wide receiver out of USC, and also one of the best running backs in this year's draft, and Jonathan Taylor of Wisconsin. And in the 3rd round, they took Julian Blackman, the safety out of Utah, and they took Jacob Eason, the quarterback out of Washington, with their 4th round pick. And as I said last year, they finished 7-9, which was still respectable, but missed the playoffs. It was a far cry from their lofty Super Bowl expectations back when Luck was still the quarterback. But how about Roman? You start us off here. What do you think about the Colts? I'm saving my takes for right now, but I think they're going to be a really good team. What do you think?
I'm still a bit iffy on them. I know like their main point of focus is the defense. I know with Leonard, or Darius Leonard, and a bunch of other pieces they have that can contend in the division, especially in a week 1 like this. I think Phillip Rivers joining the Indianapolis is a decent move, better than Brissett for sure, but he's on his last legs, of course, and only a couple years away from retirement. So I'm not really expecting too much out of him, but he'll definitely sling it like he did in Los Angeles and probably get burned for it like he used to do.
Yeah, I absolutely disagree with that. I think the Colts are going to be an excellent football team this year. This is one of the teams that I am most high on in terms of improving this year. I think this is the team that's going to win the division, man. I am going all in on the Colts very quickly here. I mean, Phillip Rivers, I do agree. Probably not the greatest quarterback in the league, but I think he's still serviceable enough to win football games. I don't think he is going to sling the ball around a lot, but he does have a much improved offensive line here in Indianapolis, they're one of the best offensive lines in the league. I know his weapons are a little bit worse. I mean, T.Y. Hilton's still a very good receiver when he's actually on the field. And then Michael Pittman Jr., I absolutely love this prospect. One of my favorite receivers from the class. I think he's going to be an absolute stud for them. This is a guy that is kind of the Mike Williams variety, a guy that can go up and grab the ball. Maybe not as good in terms of a deep threat, but a guy that can go up. In college, at least, he proved that he can go up and grab the ball. He's a great contested catch guy. He's a pretty good route runner as well. Not, like I said, not a great deep threat where Mike Williams was, but I think he's going to play a pretty similar role in this offense. Well, they do have T.Y. Hilton that can run the deep routes as well. They also have Jonathan Taylor too, and I mean, with this great offensive line, they have Marlon Mack, Jonathan Taylor. That's going to be a really good 1-2 duo. I don't know exactly how it's going to break out yet, and may kind of hint towards a fantasy pick later on with Mack or Taylor, but both of them should be pretty solid this year in terms of actual pure running backs and should help them win games. And then the defense, I don't think they're an elite unit, but I think this is a good unit. I mean, they got DeForest Buckner is a very good defensive tackle. I mean, they acquired him for a first rounder. I think that was a pretty good move for both teams. I think they needed a guy to fill up that hole, and then they also, San Fran needed to replace him as well because they couldn't really afford to pay him. But I think it was a good move for both sides.
Yeah, I am completely with you there, Chris. I think the Colts are probably going to win this division. Of course, we'll get into the other two teams a little bit later on that were actually better than them last year. And, of course, our standings predictions a little bit later on. But I really like this team. I think you look at last year, they had a really good defense, and they had a good offense just outside of the quarterback position. Then you throw in my opinion, a future Hall of Famer in Phillip Rivers. I know he's older now, and he had a really bad season for the Chargers last year, but the weapons are around him. Weapons are around him to be successful. I mean, you look at Mack. They even also got Hines as well, and Taylor. They got a really good running back room, wide receivers, good wide receivers, and also they got Jack Doyle at tight end. They got a decent offensive line. I really like this team. I'm kind of biased because I also really like Phillip Rivers. I think he's extremely underrated throughout his career. And I think this might be his best shot at a Super Bowl because I really like this team. I'm not saying they're going to be better than the Chiefs or the Ravens, but I think like last year we saw with their division rival, the Titans, they had a few breaks here and there, and they were in the AFC Championship game and almost made it to the Super Bowl. And I could see the same thing for the Colts this year. And in my opinion, this Colts team is better than last year's Titans team. So I really like this team for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that, Drew, for sure. And, I mean, we talked about what they lost, but if you look at that list of players, there really isn't a lot. I mean, Quincy Wilson, Pierre Desser, and Eric Ebron are all serviceable players, but none of those three are like key pieces of this team. And, I mean, they just replaced Wilson with Julian Blackmon, which I actually do like him as well as a player. So, I mean, look at that. I mean, they didn't lose that much. And they also, I mean, say what you want about him last year. Xavier Rhodes he was a good cornerback before. I mean, maybe he's still got a little juice left. Put him in a better system. Maybe he can still do a little bit of work for a couple more years before he inevitably retires. But I still think I really do think the Colts are a well-rounded football team, and I think they should win this division. That's how I see it. And I do agree that Drew that I'm not saying that they're better than the Ravens or the Chiefs, but they definitely are, in my opinion, a top 4 to 5 team in this in the entire AFC, and I think they have a decent shot of making a run in the playoffs.
We haven't even mentioned Darius Leonard either. Darius Leonard's a really good
player.
Defensive option on that. One of the in my opinion, one of the best defensive players in the league. So I really like this team, and the more and more I look at them and talk about them, I like them even more. So and Michael Pittman Jr. too. He's gonna be really good as well. But yeah, Roman, do you have anything else to add? I know you're kind of lower on the Colts here, but
yeah, they're a bit iffy. I understand your excitement for them, Chris and Drew, but I think when you look at the other teams in the division, they just have more established defenses, more established quarterbacks, and you look at the first 2 picks of the draft. I think they hit it home completely. Pittman and Taylor both helped them out, kind of set the course for the future. Pittman, I think, will be a future wide receiver 1 on that team. I think Hilton isn't what he used to be, so I think Pittman will fill in nicely. Could be an underrated fantasy option or an underrated pickup like A.J. Brown was last year. And then Taylor, obviously, I think will break out similar to Dobbins' role I talked about last time. I think he has the same situation in Indianapolis. Those are a couple exciting pieces, but overall, I don't really necessarily see the vision that you guys have for this team.
It's fair enough. We'll get into Titans and Texans here in a second after we're done with the Colts. But I feel like as Chris mentioned, the Colts didn't really lose a whole lot, and they added a lot, in my opinion. And even like Trey Burton, I mean, he's not a great tight end by any means, but he's probably equal to Ebron, in my opinion. Back when he was with Philadelphia, he was a really good option. And I think some of the woes he faced in Chicago were not just because of him; it was also because of who was playing quarterback. But we don't have to get into Trubisky at this moment in time. We don't have to get into Trubisky yet. We don't have to just crap on Trubisky during every one of our episodes. But and then same thing. The Texans, obviously, they lost a ton of pieces as well. So I think it's definitely going to be a close division race between these 3 teams. And I kind of reflected that in my standings projections. But I still think, on paper at least, the Colts are the best team in this division. And I think, honestly, outside the quarterback position, I think they might have been the best team in the league in this division last year. They just didn't have a good quarterback, and they still finished 7-9, which is not like terrible. It's not good, but not awful. Not awful by any means. No. But yeah, any other thoughts on the Colts before we jump into our fantasy picks?
No, I'm just excited for them this year.
All right, Chris, I think you went first for the Jaguars. So Roman, take us away here with the Colts.
Yeah, I could talk about Marlon Mack, who's a great late round value, but I'm going to talk about Jonathan Taylor a little bit more. I think obviously they drafted him in the second round for a reason, a high second round draft pick. And even though there's some word going around that Mack will be the starter at the beginning of the season, you can definitely guarantee that Taylor will have an increased role as the season goes. And it's kind of like the Ingram Dobbins situation, which I talked about last time. You can draft Taylor, but even though it'll be a lot earlier than where Dobbins would go. So that's like the only risk I have with him. You can draft him really early, but obviously he won't start right away or may not have that increased role right away. But by the end of the season, he should be a league winner, a high running back too, for sure. And you can't go wrong, even taking him as a flex at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, and Jonathan Taylor for me is kind of a guy. I'm just avoiding this backfield in general. I think Marlon Mack, while he has some value late in drafts. I mean, what is he really giving you? He's giving you a few weeks of maybe flex to RB2 value. In a standard league, I'm all right with it. If you're playing PPR, I'm kind of out on that. I don't really care about what he offers in terms of like a flex spot. He's probably not going to start on my team anyway, but Taylor, yeah, he definitely has a ton of upside. This is a guy that I'm already being wrong on this year. In terms of his actual NFL career, I think he's going to be an awesome running back for both real life and fantasy. He's an outstanding player. But I don't think he's going to get enough pass catching work. And I also think Mac's still going to have a role as well as Nyheim Hines. So I'm kind of out on Taylor. I don't really like the draft price, as Roman was saying before. It's basically like a fourth, maybe even a late third, early fourth round pick. I'm not willing to invest that kind of draft capital in a guy that may not start until week 5, and who really even knows what kind of share of the lion's share of the workload he's actually going to have. So I'm kind of worried about him this year.
The draft price is what scares me. I think Taylor's going to be a really good running back for you, and if he drops to maybe the 5th, 6th round, I'm all over him for sure. But as Chris said, he's currently going in like the 3rd or 4th round, and I like some of the other options, especially at running back, like the Lev Bells, Melvin Gordon. I like those. I like those options a lot better than Taylor, just because it's a crowded running back room. And as we kind of saw previously with Phillip Rivers and with the Chargers, the 2 running backs can be fantasy viable, as we saw with Eckler and Melvin Gordon. And I still think Mack and Taylor are probably going to be both viable fantasy options throughout the season. But I just don't love taking Taylor as my clear-cut RB2, RB3, because that's kind of where he's going right now. But if he drops, I'll all over him, because he's still probably going to get you 10 to 11 points, maybe 8 or 9 points some weeks as well. But I just don't love the draft price, plain and simple.
Yeah.
Chris, how about you jump into your fantasy pick here?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and talk about the other draft pick, Michael Pittman Jr. This is a guy, you have T.Y. Hilton there, but it's inevitable he's going to go down with an injury. So Michael Pittman Jr. really, for me, is the number 1 receiver here. I expect him to end up taking over that role at some point because, like I said before, I expect T.Y. Hilton to get injured like he always does. But the guy that's basically going either undrafted or super late in drafts. I believe he actually went undrafted in our draft, which was kind of an error by me. I probably should have taken him with one of my last picks. But I think Pittman projects to be a guy that could be a PPR machine. I mean, he's a pretty good route runner, a guy that should be a pretty good safety blanket for Phillip Rivers, and he can go up and make those contested catches, which I also like as well. So I think he could be a red zone threat and offer some touchdown upside. And so I'm pretty excited for him this year. He's not a guy that I'm like, oh yeah, you need to get him in your starting lineup. It's a guy that I like to take a shot on late in drafts, or if you already had your draft, go try to pick him up or something, or try to offer a trade for something, just a meaningless piece. You probably can get it done because I think Pittman has a lot of upside this year. I think he could end up being a wide receiver too. I'm not projecting it, but I think it could happen.
Yeah, I think Pittman will be the A.J. Brown of this year, and we kind of know how A.J. Brown performed last season towards the end back stretch of the season. He went completely off, and I expect Pittman to maybe go into that similar stretch of games. I think he'll be a wide receiver 1 eventually, like you kind of talked about, Chris. T.Y. Hilton always goes down with an injury for anything, really. And I think he's better than a certain other USC wide receiver that we talked about last week in Juju. I know we kind of mentioned that Juju might not be a wide receiver 1 completely yet, but I think Pittman will be perfect in slotting that role when asked upon and perform very, very well in that offense.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't think I'm as high on Pittman as you guys are this year. I think he's probably tops out as like a wide receiver 2, which is still really good though, because his draft price is pretty much nothing. And T.Y. Hilton, I'm a little bit higher on him than you guys, as you'll probably see here in a second. but he does have some serious injury concerns. And Rivers, he likes to feed the ball to a lot of different mouths, right? We saw in Los Angeles, Mike Williams was still a good fantasy option. Hunter Henry, along with Keenan Allen, Melvin Gordon, Austin Eckler. There was a ton of viable fantasy options on that Chargers offense, and I think we'll probably see much of the same this year with this Colts. But I'll jump into my pick now. So I was going to originally say Marlon Mack just because he's going super low in drafts. I still think he's going to be a decent fantasy option, but we already kind of talked about him. T.Y. Hilton, his draft price has kind of decreased since previous years. Typically, you had to spend like a third or fourth round pick on him. Now he's going a little bit lower than that. And I still think he's a really good wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 with upside because Rivers likes to air the ball out and Hilton's a legit deep threat guy. However, the injuries are a serious concern there with T.Y. Hilton. So I'm going with Phillip Rivers. His draft price is next to nothing at the moment, and I think this offense has the potential to be really, really good. And I think you could either pick him up on waivers, take him with your last pick in the draft, and he could potentially be your QB1. Interceptions are a serious concern there, but I think Frank Reich is a really good coach too. We didn't even talk about him when we were breaking down the team, and I think Rivers could be a really good option there. I mean, you look at a guy like a Ben Roethlisberger, who is being taken in most drafts as like a backup quarterback or like a low-end QB1. I think the upside that you see with Roethlisberger is very similar to the upside we see with Rivers. And Rivers also, he loves to stay on the field, so you don't really have to worry about injuries with him. But you really have to spend nothing for him, much like Pittman, and I think the upside is definitely there with Rivers.
Yeah, I like Rivers this year as more of a safe. I think he's probably going to finish with inside the top 12 most likely in terms of just being a safe player. I don't see quite as much upside as you. I know you really like Phillip Rivers as a player, but he's never really been that guy over the last few years. So I'm kind of out on the upside part. But I don't. It's another guy kind of like Gardner where I don't mind taking him late in drafts and then having him. He could be my quarterback 1. I'm not super excited about it, but you know what I mean. Like he's serviceable as a QB1. I think he'll give you at least 15 to 18 points on a given week, not with a crazy upside to get you like a 35-point game. See, he actually has 0 30-plus point games in his entire NFL career in terms of fantasy. So that's a crazy stat. 0, and his highest is 29.9. I think that's crazy. He's played in the league for so long.
Well, come on, that's basically 30 points.
It's not 30 though.
I like a few other guys ahead of Rivers, but like I kind of mentioned at the beginning, he does throw a lot of interceptions, so that will maybe win or lose you some weeks depending on if he throws a couple or not. So I just be wary of that and just know what you're getting with Rivers.
I think it goes back to what you mentioned earlier with Roman when we were talking about Minshew, is to just draft your quarterback late, because we've said with both the first 2 teams we mentioned here, and I think another team we're going to talk about here in a second, these quarterbacks might go undrafted and they still have the potential to be a top 12 quarterback in your league. So in my opinion, don't waste your top picks on a Lamar Jackson or Patrick Mahomes, so you can still get good options at the quarterback position pretty much undrafted. So any final thoughts on the Colts before we move on to the Tennessee Titans?
Yeah, I'll give you just one really quick kind of dart throw fantasy option as well, just kind of like a 1B option. Another receiver, Paris Campbell. You can't forget they took him in the second round last year. This is a guy that is projected to start in the slot for this team, and if he does, he may have a role. I mean, you think about Keenan Allen has always been really good. I'm not saying he's Keenan Allen, but a guy that you could take, another undrafted kind of guy like Michael Pittman Jr. that you could go in on and maybe get some PPR value.
And Jack Doyle too. We didn't mention Jack Doyle.
Yeah, him as well.
If he can stay healthy, he's a good tight end option as well.
There's a lot of sleeper picks on this team.
Yeah, because I think Rivers has shown in the past, even if he himself isn't a great fantasy option, because he's only gotten 29.9 points, never got 30 points. He still likes to get everyone involved, and he's got a lot of viable fantasy options around him. And I think this team has the weapons to kind of do that. So I think they're going to be a great fantasy team as well as a great real life football team.
I agree.
Let's jump into the Cinderella team of last year, the Tennessee Titans. They, of course, finished 9-7 and made it all the way to the AFC Championship game, including an impressive upset of the Baltimore Ravens there in the divisional round, the 14-2 Baltimore Ravens. So huge surprise there by the Titans. The big thing was when they benched Marcus Mariota midway through the season, brought in Ryan Tannehill, and Tannehill was, I think, by QBR, he was the best quarterback in the league, which is pretty nuts. He had by far his best statistical season, even though in Miami he still was, in my opinion, serviceable. But just kind of could never stay healthy on the field. And he stayed healthy for half the season, led the Titans all the way to the AFC Championship game. He, along with, of course, Derrick Henry. So they did lose some pieces, but we'll jump into the additions first. They added linebacker Vic Beasley, cornerback Jonathan Joseph, and offensive tackle Ty Sembrello. They lost, though, starting offensive tackle Jack Conklin to the Browns. I mentioned it there. Quarterback Marcus Mariota went to the Raiders. Defensive tackle Jarrell Casey to the Broncos. Running back Deion Lewis to the Giants. Wide receiver Tajay Sharp to the Vikings. Cornerback Tremaine Brock to the rival Jaguars. Cornerback Logan Ryan, and also tight end Delaney Walker. They elected to not re-sign either of those guys, and they're still currently free agents. In terms of the draft, they spent their first-round pick on Isaiah Wilson, the offensive tackle out of Georgia. They spent their second-round pick on Kristen Fulton, the cornerback out of LSU. And then in the third round, they took Darrington Evans, running back out of Appalachian State. As I mentioned there, the Titans were a Cinderella team last year. Nobody really kind of saw it coming, and they had an incredible season, incredible run to the AFC Championship game, almost knocked off the eventual Super Bowl champion Chiefs. However, I tend to think they lost some pieces here, and I'm kind of a little bit worried about their chances to maybe repeat their Cinderella run. But Chris, how would you start us off here? What do you think about this team?
Yeah, I'm 100% in agreement with you. I am extremely worried about this team. I don't know if they're going to be a very good football team this year. I actually think that they lost. I mean, I didn't even really know completely exactly who they lost, but even looking at this sheet, I mean, you got Jack Conklin, a very quality tackle. Jarrell Casey was one of their best defensive players. Tremaine Brock and Logan Ryan, both pretty good corners. I mean, that's four pretty big pieces right there already off the team. And I really don't think they added. I mean, Vic Beasley's fine, but he hasn't even really been showing up to camp. So, and then Jonathan Joseph's got nothing left either. And then the draft, I really don't think they added that much in. I mean, Isaiah Wilson, he's probably more of a project tackle. He went way after all those elite options. So, I mean, probably more of a project for him. And then Christian Fulton as well. I mean, I kind of like him, but he fell in the draft, so maybe there's some concerns there as well. So I really don't think they add a lot, and I think they lost a lot of quality pieces. So this is a team I'm definitely worried about, and the main reason why I don't think this division is very good. I think the Titans are going to take a big time step back.
Yeah, I'm not really excited to see this product on the field. I think they'll be easy to stop compared to last year. The only weapons they have that they need to worry about is Derrick Henry, who had a monster season last year, who I think will take a step back. More defenses will try to stop him because their quarterback, Ryan Tannehill, I don't think will have the best season. I think Tennessee kind of made a mistake giving him that large contract, and we've seen it before. Jacksonville paid Foles too much. And I think the Panthers paid Bridgewater too much. I think Tannehill is kind of on that same level. So I don't think Tannehill will live up to that contract and definitely regress and ultimately putting the Titans in a mediocre range of teams.
I'm very surprised. I think I'm a little bit higher on this team than you guys are, but I still don't think they're a playoff team. I think they're going to be definitely in the playoff hunt for sure. They're going to be like that. At least in years past, we never see the Titans just be awful, right? They're always like a 6-10, 7-9, 9-7, that sort of range. And I think they're going to be in the playoff hunt. You look at the offense. I think Ryan Tannehill is definitely going to regress, even though I think he is a good quarterback, and I think he's going to be solid. Derrick Henry is a really good running back, but I don't think he's going to be able to repeat the production he had last year. They have a decent wide receiver room, and even though they lost some obviously Jack Conklin on the offensive line, they're still a reasonable offensive line, still pretty serviceable, still pretty kind of, I would say, above average. Defensively, they're not as good as they were last year. They lost a lot of pieces, but they're still going to be okay. So I think they're going to be a very average football team. I don't think they're going to be as great as they were last year. Even in the regular season, they were only 9-7. But they, of course, were on the huge run. And I think people tend to think they might have been a better team than they really were. So they're going to be in the playoff hunt. They're going to be average, but I don't think they're going to be anything special like they were last year.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. Derrick Henry, with what Roman was saying, I completely agree. I think defense is going to really start to key in on him, and I think he's going to regress this year, which I'm sure one of us will touch up on fantasy, but I'm kind of excited to talk about him in that. But you can't forget about, how good A.J. Brown was last year. He was unreal in the second half of last year. I think that's more of a product of how talented he is as a player, not some Cinderella run that he's going to be just nothing after this. I think he's absolutely a bona fide wide receiver one, and that breakout option that's going to continue to stay broken out. I think he's going to have another great season.
And I think
I also want to touch on. You can go.
No, you go, Ron.
I'm also a huge fan of Mike Vrabel, their head coach, who gets a lot of that out of his players. So I definitely think it's a possibility that they can contend for a wild card spot, but I just think they'll regress to the mean and be just average.
Agreed.
I think I'm a little higher on Tannehill. I mean, I always liked Tannehill, even back when he was in Miami. I think if he stays healthy, he can definitely win this football team some games, even if defenses start to key in on Derrick Henry. And I think it could really help if they start to key in on Derrick Henry and then Tannehill starts to air the ball out a little bit more. They got good receivers, as we already mentioned. A.J. Brown, Corey Davis is a decent option. Adam Humphries is a decent option. A.J. Brown, I think, is going to be really good this year. And if they start to air the ball out a little bit more and they start to do it successfully, I think they might have to start kind of stop focusing as much on Derrick Henry, and that could maybe open up things for Derrick Henry as well. So and I'm glad you mentioned Mike Vrabel because he is a really good coach, and I think he's not going to let this team just completely crumble. There's still going to be I could see them finishing anywhere between 7-9 to like 9-7 if things break right, maybe even 10-6 if things break right. But they're an average football team. I think that's going to reflect in their record. And it kind of stinks because I do wish they would have kept some of their pieces. And I know they were in the Tom Brady sweepstakes, and it would have been kind of cool if they signed Tom Brady because I think the team that they had last year almost won the Super Bowl, as we said. So they're going to be a decent team. It won't surprise me if they fall into a playoff spot, but not a whole lot of excitement here from Tennessee Titans, if I'm being honest.
Agreed. Yeah, there isn't really that much to talk about with this team. I mean, their defense, it was good last year. I think it's going to take a step. I think it's almost guaranteed to take a step back this year. I mean, losing Logan Ryan, one of the better corners in the league. I mean, replacing it with a rookie, it usually doesn't always pan out super well. And Jonathan Joseph, like I said before, offers little to nothing on at the corner position. He's pretty washed. Vic Beasley was a very good addition. He's a great player, but they also paid up for him. So I mean,
and he's not reporting to camp. He's got some issues as well. So
yeah.
They're going to be a decent defense, though. But like I said,
it'll be fun.
Definition of an average football team here in Tennessee, in my opinion. But
I couldn't agree more.
Chris, I think it's your turn to jump into fantasy picks here. So, who's your fantasy pick on this team?
Yeah, and I'm just gonna jump into the centerpiece of the team. It's Derrick Henry for me. The fact that we play in a PPR league, he is completely off my draft board. I have no interest in drafting running backs that blew up for half a season, was pretty mediocre for the first half of the year in terms of pretty much offering flex to RB2 numbers. And yeah, it did blow up in the second half, was a top 5 back. But the fact that he catches absolutely no passes means he is off my board. There is probably he ranks more in the teens, as we kind of showed in my when we did the fantasy rankings a couple weeks ago. He really didn't rank that high on. I believe he wasn't that high on Drew's list as well, and that's the reason when you're talking about full PPR, it's a guy that literally has no pass catching ability. He caught 15 passes last year. I expect it to be very similar this year, and even took a couple of them to the house. I don't expect that to happen again this year. But on the ground, yeah, he's gonna give you a very safe floor, and that's kind of what you're getting. It's a floor play, but I don't like drafting floor plays in the first round, so I'm out on him in PPR. In standard, he's probably more of a top 6 pick. He's a great pick in standard because he's going to give you he's going to get a lot of rushing touchdowns on the ground. But the fact that he offers no passing work whatsoever is he's just off my draft board. If he does good, whatever.
I'm a little confused here though, Chris. So is he your fantasy pick or your fantasy anti-pick? Because you kind of just said he's my fantasy pick and then just gave every reason not to draft him. So
Well, yeah. I wanted to go over a guy. I do this. I usually go I go with some anti guys every once in a while too. And he's one of them for me. I just want to make sure some people are. If you're playing in a full PPR, I think you should consider not just keep him off your board.
Okay, because I was like, oh, he likes Derrick Henry, and then you just gave every reason not to draft Derrick Henry. So okay, we'll change the segment to fantasy picks and non-picks. But Roman, do you have any thoughts on Derrick Henry?
Yeah, I didn't think Chris would pick him as an actual drafting pick, but I'll take him as my dupe draft pick, especially in standard leagues. I know I'll try to be a little devil's advocate here. In 2019, he had 1,500 yards and 16 touchdowns, which is obviously close to being running back 1. Even if he regresses a little bit, he'll still be a top 10 option. Last year he was going 2nd or 3rd round, but now you have to pay up a 1st-round pick for him. But like I said, even though he'll regress, he'll still be a top running back option in standard leagues, not PPR.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So if you're in standard, I'd take the pick in the late 1st round on him. but just know your league, obviously.
Yeah, I'm probably in the middle with you guys. I think he was on my don't draft list when we did our fantasy do's and don'ts a few weeks ago. I don't love the draft price, but if he does somehow fall to you in the second or third round, he's definitely a really good option there. He's obviously going to regress. I mean, it's inevitable he's going to regress because he had like a career year, a historic year last season. But I think this offense is going to be okay, and I think if Tannehill can be good again, or at least just slightly above average, and take some of the heat off of Henry, I think they're going to be a good team. He's going to be a good fantasy option. But I'll jump into mine here. I can't believe he's still on the board. I'll take A.J. Brown here. I mean, he's probably the best fantasy option, at least maybe not as much upside as Henry, but I think he's still going to be he's the safest pick out of any guy on the Titans offense. He's currently going around kind of the same range as DJ Chark, DK Metcalf, those kind of guys. I think he has wide receiver one potential, especially, as I said, a lot of their fantasy kind of potential lies with Ryan Tannehill. If he can have at least somewhat of a good season, and if Tannehill can get AJ Brown the ball, he's going to be a really good fantasy option, I think.
Yeah,
I wish I could take Brown and Chark. I wish I could take Brown and Chark in drafts, but they kind of go around the same spot, like you said, Drew. So mostly impossible to get those two on a team together. But like I said earlier with Chark, I think Brown has the same upside as him. They'll probably be, throwing a lot, maybe more than last year. Tannehill has to prove the contract he got, which I think he'll throw a lot more and maybe take the workload off Henry a little bit. But I definitely love Brown and where he's at in the draft, so take him 100%.
Especially PPR.
Yeah. Actually, I like him a little bit more in a standard league because he's not a big receptions guy. I mean, he only had like 50-some receptions last year. He had over 1,000 yards. So, I mean, I actually like him more in a standard league, but I like him all around. He's in standard league. I think he's no doubt locked and loaded top 10 receiver for me that you can get in like the early middle rounds. I would say 4 or 5 around that range. But in a PPR league, he's more of you draft him as a wide receiver too, but he has insanely high upside. I think he can catch more passes than he did last year. I think he will definitely do that. I think his upside in terms of receptions is probably around 80, but that's absolutely fine with a player like that. I mean, you can get those. You can get those seasons like what Anquan Bolden, he kind of brought that to the table before. A big like bruising, breaking tackles guy that can take basically any play to the house. I really like AJ Brown this year, and it was almost my pick. I just wanted to get my Derrick Henry. I want to slander him a little bit before AJ Brown would have been my pick in terms of the player I actually like.
Yeah, but when I said I like him in PPR, it's because he does, as you mentioned, he didn't have as many receptions last year, so he tends to sometimes drop in PPR drafts.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Potential is definitely there.
I agree.
Any final thoughts on the Titans here before we jump into our final team?
No, I think we're all good.
So last team we're going to talk about is the defending division champs, the Houston Texans. I have my DeAndre Hopkins Houston Texans jersey on at the moment, but of course he's no longer a member of this team. Probably the biggest move, at least definitely the most scrutinized move of the NFL offseason. But last year, let's start with last year. They finished 10-6. They won a wild game against Buffalo. Personally, my favorite playoff game of the NFL season last year. And then they went up huge on the Chiefs in this divisional round. Everybody was like, oh, my God. And then they just absolutely collapsed. And the Chiefs, of course, ended up beating the other divisional foe, the Titans, and then won the Super Bowl. But they had a really good season last year. Were very close to making the Super Bowl, as I just mentioned. But they had some pieces, but they also lost a ton of spot pieces, which is why I ultimately think they're probably a second-place team, but they do definitely have first-place upside. But in terms of additions, they added David Johnson, of course, in that Hopkins blockbuster trade. They also added wide receiver Brandon Cooks, wide receiver Randall Cobb, cornerback Jalen Watkins, safety Michael Thomas, and defensive tackle P.J. Hall. In terms of subtractions, as I've already mentioned a couple times, they lost arguably one of the best wide receivers in the game, and DeAndre Hopkins to the Arizona Cardinals in a very, very questionable trade by Bill O'Brien. They lost defensive tackle DJ Reader to the Bengals, running back Carlos Hyde to the Seahawks, cornerback Jonathan Joseph to the Titans, linebacker Barkevius Bingo to the Bears, safety Tashawn Gibson also to the Bears, running back Lamar Miller to the Patriots, and then defensive tackle Eddie Vanderdoes, who would like to be opt out for this season. They didn't have a first-round pick because Bill O'Brien doesn't believe in first-round picks. And then in the second round, they took Ross Blacklock, defensive tackle at TCU. In the third round, they took Jonathan Grenard, defensive end out of Florida. And they spent their 2 fourth-round picks on Charlie Heck, offensive tackle out of North Carolina, and cornerback John Reed out of Penn State. This is a team who was, like I said last year, very good, very kind of slightly above average, but had – I think what most people would agree is maybe the worst offseason of any team in the NFL. So my expectations are very low for this team, but I'm interested to see, Roman, how you start us off here. What do you think about Houston?
Yeah, I don't want to spoil the record, but this is my division winner for me, and I think they do have a cupcake schedule, I believe, besides the first 2 weeks of the season where they play Kansas City and Baltimore in back-to-back weeks. I understand if they lose both of those, but besides that, I think they have a good enough schedule and a good enough team to win a lot of games this season, and I think win the division more convincingly than maybe you guys believe in. Yes, they did lose DeAndre Hopkins, but you have to realize that he did have an average season last year, and while it is a big hit to the team, they do still have Cooks and Will Fuller, who I think are more than above average wide receivers, and as long as they have Deshaun Watson on the field, they'll be in contention for the playoffs.
Yeah, I disagree with that. I'm probably going to be the lowest on this team. I think this might be the third place team in the division. I love Deshaun Watson. That's what I'll say about this. I absolutely love Deshaun Watson as a player. You can't count him out as a player. So I could see them. There's a pathway where he carries them to a division. I think he would basically have to be the most valuable player in the NFL to do that, because I think this roster is an absolute joke now. I think Bill O'Brien is the worst coach and general manager. I mean, he does both horribly in football. I think he's not a coach ever, but he's terrible as a GM. The guy can't handle it. I mean, I don't know why he does both. It just makes no sense. I mean, he makes moves like taking on David Johnson's $11 million a year washed up contract for the second best receiver in the NFL, in my opinion. So I think that highlights how bad he is. And I think this team has a terrible offensive line. Their secondary is probably going to be one of the worst in football. They have a pretty decent linebacking core, and defensive line is all right as well. But besides that, I hate everything on this team. I think they're Watson. If they didn't have Watson, this would be like a 4-win football team, in my opinion. I think Watson will carry them to 7-9.
Yeah, I think Bill O'Brien's a good coach. The Texans tend to always kind of overachieve if you look at the last few years. In terms of GM, though, he's awful. I mean, he just, as I mentioned, he trades first-round picks like they're nothing. I mean, the Leonard Tunsil trade, I mean, we can go on and on here. But and the Hopkins thing, I mean, I don't even hate taking on David Johnson, but the fact that they took on his entire contract is just very confusing to me. And by all accounts, the reason Hopkins wanted out of Houston was solely because of Bill O'Brien, which I mean, you look at in a lot of different sports. I mean, we, of course, are from Detroit. So I look at Stan Van Gundy when he was both general manager and head coach of the Pistons. That didn't end well. It ended with us taking on Blake Griffin's ridiculous contract. And the same thing happened here with Bill O'Brien. I think he's just got way too much on his plate here. I think this roster is still decent. They definitely got talent. I like Brandon Cooks. I like Randall Cobb. They're obviously not going to be able to replace, because even though Hopkins had a relatively down year last year, like you said, Roman, he was still a really good wide receiver in the NFL. And Cooks and Cobb are serviceable. And Will Fuller, I think, if he can stay healthy, which he never is able to stay healthy, I think he's a really good talent. And same thing with David Johnson. I mean, he had a really bad year last year, but the talent is definitely there. And I think I'm a little higher on them than you, Chris, but I still think I'm not as high on them as you, Roman. I think they're going to be very similar to the Titans, I would say. And you'll kind of see that when I go over my standing predictions. They're very similar to the Titans, that they're going to be like anywhere between 6-10 to like maybe 10-6 if Deshaun Watson has like an MVP caliber year, because he is really good. One of my favorite players in the league. And I think if Johnson, Fuller stay healthy, if Cooks can kind of be more of that player he was with New Orleans, he kind of had a down year as well last year. Randall Cobb is a solid wide receiver option, but yeah, and their defense is okay, I guess. But J.J. Watt always gets hurt. I don't know.
Right. That's what I'm saying, man. Kind of just to cut into what you're saying. I mean, you talk about all those weapons, even J.J. Watt. Every one of those players you just listed, including Randall Cobb and Brandon Cooks, have all had massive injury concerns before. And I could see a world.
And Watson, too.
And Watson as well. I mean, he's had early in his career, he had a big time injury. I mean, since then he's been pretty durable, but still, I mean, the guy takes so many hits because that offensive line is such an absolute liability that And if he goes down, this team might win 2 football games, and it wouldn't surprise me. This team has a very wide range of outcomes for me. I mean, I think if everybody stays healthy, which is a gigantic if, maybe the biggest if in all of football, if everyone on the offense, Watson's still there and really good, they could end up winning the division, maybe with 9-7, 10-6. But if not, if Watson goes down, if the weapons go down, this is a 5-6 win football team at best.
I do think these in-division games will be quite competitive.
Yeah,
I can see a scenario in which the Texans go with like 3-3 or under 500 in division games. But like I said at the beginning, they do have a cupcake schedule, and I don't think it'll take an MVP season for them to win the division.
I just don't know. I mean, I don't need to talk about how much I love the Colts again because I just did that for 15 minutes. But I just think the Colts are a better team than the Texans. And I even like the Titans a little bit more than the Texans as well, because I think their defense is better. There's not as many injury concerns with the Titans. I'm a little higher on Tannehill than you guys are. I think it's going to be very close between the Texans and the Titans and even the Colts. But I don't know. The injury is concerned. The offensive line is a big question mark. The defense is decent, I guess, but not great. I mean, I'm looking at it right now, and it's not like great defense by any means.
Secondary
they have really solid skill position players, but unfortunately, all of those guys, as we already talked about, have serious injury concerns. But as I mentioned before, Bill O'Brien is an awful general manager, but he is a decent head coach. So he's gonna coach them up, and they're gonna be a decent team, and especially now because he wants to prove everybody wrong that he wasn't just an absolute joke by trading away DeAndre Hopkins. I'm not against trading away Hopkins, especially if he doesn't want to be there. But come on, reportedly there were better offers on the table, or he didn't even this was the first offer he got, and he was like, okay, yeah, let's do this. There were some teams that were like, wait, what? I didn't even know Hopkins was available. It's what are you doing, Bill? Come on, you got nothing.
Could have gotten a lot more.
You didn't get a first round pick. That's ridiculous. But whatever. We could do a whole podcast just about how bad of a GM Bill O'Brien is, because we're not even talking about the Clowney, the tons, all that stuff that he just was not a good GM at all. But,
no.
I'm interested though, Roman, because you're a little bit higher on this team. Do you like their defense? Is that? Because I know you kind of mentioned the offense you kind of believe in, but do you like the defense?
I believe they have some good pieces, and obviously they have J.J. Watt, who could be a comeback player of the year candidate. And I think their draft pick in Ross Blacklock was a nice pick, a nice addition as well. And I still believe that this team can still compete. I don't know why you guys are so low on them, considering that you think they'll maybe go 8-8 potentially. But I think they'll have a good record, and I don't have any reason to believe they'll be a lot worse.
I think if it's a big question mark though is just health is my thing, because even if Deshaun Watson doesn't go down with a season-ending injury, we've seen in the past with all the offensive line troubles they've had where he's been playing with broken ribs and all this stuff. And I think even he could be still playing, but just not be 100%. And I think that severely limits the potential of this team. I mean, I see a roadmap for them finishing 10-6, 11-5. But there's just David Johnson, Will Fuller, Brandon Cooks, it's eventual that they have Kenny Stills too, which I guess that's okay as their wide receiver 4, but there's a roadmap where Cooks and Fuller and David Johnson all go down with injuries. Watson gets banged up, and I definitely see a roadmap for them finishing 5-11, 4-12 if AJ McCarron's their starting quarterback. However, I do still see the upside that you see, Roman, where they do end up finishing 11-5, but also the defense too. JJ Watt could get hurt. He's gotten hurt the last few years. There's just a lot of red flags here, and with the Colts, I at least feel like there's not as much downside.
Yeah, that's what I think too.
They might not have the flashy names, but I think they can compete comparing what they did last year and moving forward.
I completely agree, but just the injuries.
The health.
That's why it's fine. Because I do think Brandon Cooks and Will Fuller and Randall Cobb and David Johnson and even Darren Fells are all really good options. It's just, are they going to stay healthy? And if they stay healthy, I think they're going to be for sure a solid playoff team, and right there in the hunt. They're probably going to be in the hunt anyway, just because with the expanded playoff. And as I mentioned, Bill O'Brien is a good coach, even if he's a terrible GM. But I like this though. This is definitely probably the most controversial team I think we've had at any of these episodes. I feel like Chris and I are super low in the Texans, and Roman's not super high, but you're higher than us.
Our rankings are going to be a lot different.
Yes.
For sure.
Any final thoughts on the Texans here before we jump into our fantasy picks?
I know. Absolutely.
All right. So Roman, since you're the highest on the Texans, I think it's only right if you go first here with our fantasy picks.
Sure. I'll talk about David Johnson and obviously Hopkins trading away. That was a big hit to them, but Bill O'Brien is going to want to use David Johnson a lot considering what they gave up for him. And you're definitely not going to get him as your running back 1 or running back 2 at least. You're going to get him as a flex, and you can even stash him on the bench, which I think is a good spot for him considering that he has to prove himself to the team and get his usage. They still have Duke Johnson on the team. So they're going to use him in the receiving game a little bit. But David Johnson, I think, could revitalize his career a little bit, kind of like what Kenyon Drake did in Arizona, what David Johnson could probably do in Houston. And you can get him, fifth, sixth round, kind of where Bell, kind of where Taylor is going. So I think if you really want a risky but high upside pick, you can go with David Johnson.
Where I'm seeing him going right now is basically mid-third round. So maybe
depends what league you're in.
I would be all right taking him, but this is another guy that I'm out on this year. Last time I saw him play, the guy couldn't run. I mean, you saw everyone saw the one highlight of him trying to break the edge and getting absolutely crushed for a negative 7-yard loss. He looked like he was moving about 3 miles an hour. I don't know. This is another guy that I'm out on this year. I'm all right being wrong with him. I mean, like I said before, last time we saw him out there, he got absolutely just annihilated. He lost his job to Kenyon Drake, which when you compare Kenyon Drake to him, Kenyon Drake I actually think still has he didn't get a lot of carries in Miami, but I still think he was really good with them. I think David Johnson's well past his prime now. He's 29 now. I mean, the Cardinals obviously. I mean, he had an $11 million contract with them, and they obviously didn't want to keep him around. They were able to ship him off to the suckers and in Houston. So this is a guy I'm already being wrong on. I mean, he's going to catch some passes, but I don't see it, I guess, if that makes sense. This is a guy I'm willing to be wrong
on. I'm a little bit more. I'm a little bit more with Roman.
Real quick.
Okay, sure. You can go. You can go.
Sorry about that. If you're going to get the third round is way too high for him, so I can understand that you not having any interest in the third round, but you got to consider that. So if you can get him on the bench, I think it's still a good place for him. He'll be a high upside pick, but obviously one injury and he'll be done for a while.
Right.
I'm a little more with Roman, I think, on this one. I don't want him to take him as my clear-cut RB2, I would say. But if he kind of drops a little bit, which he tends to do just because a lot of people are out of it on him, because even last year he wasn't injured for the whole year. He just didn't look good. But if I can take him as my RB3, I mean, I absolutely love that because I think the upside is definitely there. Hopkins takes away a ton of targets in this offense. Duke Johnson is going to take some. Brandon Cooks, obviously Randall Cobb if Will Fuller stays healthy. But I think David Johnson is definitely going to take a lot of targets, a lot of touches. And I think he could be a really viable fantasy option with RB2 upside. But obviously, as with I think pretty much every fantasy option on this team, maybe outside Deshaun Watson, but even him too, there's serious injury concerns. So
yeah.
I don't love him as my RB2, but I really, really like him as my RB3 because I think there's definite upside there.
Yeah, I mean, he could definitely finish as an RB2, but just a couple more things on him. Like you said before, very injury prone. I'm not really willing to take the shot on him. I don't know. This is just a guy, like I said, I'm just completely out on. And it's a team that doesn't have the running backs that much either. And David Johnson really only specializes as a pass catcher at this point. I don't think he's going to be very efficient on the ground. He's going to average 3.5 yards per carry. And if he's not getting at least 50, 60 receptions, I don't see him being a running back too, which I mean, you're not saying you have to draft him as, but you guys are kind of saying you see the upside. I don't know. I'm out. Like I keep saying, I'm out like Shark Tank.
I think he's also hungry to prove all the haters wrong as well, much like Bill O'Brien, because it wasn't just people were ripping Bill O'Brien about the trade. I mean, David Johnson has to feel at least some offense when you see the Texans got nothing for DeAndre Hopkins and David Johnson was part of the package. So I think Johnson's probably hungry, and he was obviously like the best fantasy running back a couple of years ago. He's not too far removed.
Like a long time ago.
He's not too far removed from that. So I think if he stays healthy, he could be a reasonable RB2. I mean, that's not saying a whole lot, right? I mean, he could be a very solid RB3 with RB2 upside if he stays healthy. But that's
ranks within my RB2 range.
There's a big if with all these guys on this team. So, Chris, how about you jump in here to your fantasy pick?
Well, I'm going to go with I'm going to kind of cheat. I mean, I'm not going to break down either one of these guys too much, but I'm going to go with the combination of Brandon Cooks and Will Fuller because I think one of them will step into a role where they finish with wide receiver 2 value. I just have absolutely no idea which one. I mean, Fuller's been in the system longer, but and early on in the season, maybe he just blows up and is a top 5 receiver, but I could see that for about 3 weeks before he goes down with an inevitable leg injury like he does every single season and every single game of every season. There's no way he plays more than 5 games this year. There's not that many guys in the league more injury prone than him in any sport. So he's going to go down with his inevitable injury. And then Brandon Cooks will step into that role and most likely be a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 2-ish guy. I think he has a little bit more upside because he hasn't had quite as much injury concern. I know he has big-time concussion problems. If he gets 1 or 2 more of those, I could see him retiring from the game. But those are pretty hard to predict. In terms of actual injuries, he hasn't really had a lot of a really long laundry list of past injuries like Will Fuller has. So I think he is probably the safest option within this offense. I think he's a guy that Drew he took him pretty late, ended up trading him to me, which I'm all right with having as like a bench receiver with some upside. So I'm okay with him, but I'm not really, like I said before, I'm not really keen on any of their fantasy options a lot.
Yeah, I do kind of go around the same spot in drafts, and you might get burned with which one you pick and which one you don't pick. But I believe Will Fuller will be the clear number 1 by the end of the season at least. It might be a little blurred at the beginning, but I think Will Fuller is more of a deep threat. But obviously, like you said, 1 injury, he's down. But it could be the same said with Cooks. You're going to be unlucky if one of them gets an injury, but they both have the upside for sure.
I think that the upside is definitely higher for Fuller. But he's also got a much, much lower floor. Like I as Chris said, I drafted Cooks, and I think currently Fuller is listed on their depth chart as the wide receiver 1 and Cooks is the wide receiver 2. I think Cooks could easily move up in that wide receiver 1 range if Fuller goes down with an injury or even gets banged up a little bit. Because as Chris said, I mean, you can pretty much count on it happening. I would say maybe mid-October he goes down with a leg injury. I mean, it happens literally every single season. So I think if you're drafting for upside, if you're set at the wide receiver position, by the time you get to that, because as you said, Fuller and Cooks go on the same range. If you get to that range and you're set at receiver, definitely take Fuller because the upside. I think the upside is far more than Cooks. But if you want just more a solid, consistent option, I think Cooks is a much better fantasy option than Fuller. But yeah, potential's there, and if he stays healthy, which is probably like he's not going to stay healthy in my opinion because he never stays healthy. He could be a really good wide receiver 1, maybe top 10, top 15 wide receiver in fantasy.
Does he get you any points from the hospital bed or no? Or that's where he'll be after about 4 weeks. I mean, I do like Will Fuller the player when he's on the field, but the guy flat out isn't on the field. Like it's just I can't. He's a guy that I'm fine with someone else taking him, and maybe he plays a full year and goes off because he probably would if he played a full year. That's another guy I'm kind of, I would say, more out on. Cooks, I'm fine with drafting him, but, I mean, I don't love him either.
That's what I'm saying, though. Like, if you are set wide receiver and you're like, hey, I can take this chance, just take Fuller because the potential is definitely there. And like we said before, wide receiver position is super loaded this year. It's very deep. So worst-case scenario is Fuller gets hurt and you drop him and you get somebody else. But if you take him late enough, you're good to go. But don't take him Don't take him as your wide receiver 2, even maybe your wide receiver 3. He's much more in that wide receiver 4 range for me. But,
yeah, for me as well.
Yeah.
So, Chris, you mentioned there that there's no good fantasy options on this team, and I completely disagree because Deshaun Watson is a very good fantasy option, and he's actually kind of dropping in drafts a little bit. I think people are very worried because Hopkins is gone, but Watson, he's still going to be a really good fantasy option. Some of the drafts I've seen, he's going like after a guy like Dak Prescott, after a guy like even sometimes Drew Brees or Tom Brady as well. So I really like Deshaun Watson. I feel like he's still going to give you a lot through the air, a lot on the ground, and I think he's a really good. He could have the potential to be like the top quarterback outside of Lamar and Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, when I said that I didn't like their fantasy options, I meant just kind of all of his weapons. It's weird because I don't like any of the weapons, but I really like Deshaun Watson this year. I think he has a chance to eat on. I think he's going to run the ball a little bit more because, like I said, no safety blanket in Hopkins. Who knows who's going to be his starting receiver? Could be Kiki Kuti in the start by week 3 if all of them go down with injuries. So you never know who their actual wide receiver 1 is going to be. But I think Watson, no matter who's out there, I think he's one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And I think he's going to prove it to everybody this year by just eating this year. And I think he's a top 5 quarterback no matter what. And a guy that I agree is being slept on a little bit. We preached the late round quarterback draft, but like people are going out and taking Kyler Murray and players like Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott. I think Watson's right in the tier with them as well. I think he's getting drafted behind them, but I think he could easily finish ahead of those guys.
Yeah, I don't think drafting Watson is in the draft quarterback early section. I think he goes mid rounds, and many mock drafts I've done, I've seen him draft in the 7th or 8th rounds, even past Prescott or past Kyler Murray. So if you want to get him in the mid rounds, I don't have any problem with that. You're not going to risk much by getting him in that range. So, and he has the upside like you talked about, Chris. So I don't mind that pick at all, and he has the running ability as well, which some of the quarterbacks in that range don't have.
Yes,
yeah,
I think him a lot for sure.
He's not only is he, in my opinion, better an on-field, real-life football than a Dak Prescott or a Kyler Murray, because I love Deshaun Watson, but he's also, in my opinion, a much better fantasy option. And especially if those guys stay healthy, even if they do get hurt, he's still going to be really good fantasy-wise because he likes to run the ball, and Kiki Kuti and Kenny Stills aren't awful options, right? They're not good, but they're awful. But if by some grace of God, Will Fuller does stay healthy this year and Brandon Cooks is good, he could be really, really good. Maybe even compete in that more like a Mahomes Jackson tier, which could be really good because, like as we mentioned, his draft price is really low. I think because of the loss of Hopkins. But Watson is probably my favorite quarterback, aside from like the guys you could take like super, super late, as we already mentioned with Minshew and Rivers. But yeah, I think Watson's a really good quarterback option. If you're kind of set in the skill positions and you're like, I don't really want to wait to draft my quarterback, he's a really good option.
Yeah, I like him as well. Just a quick question before we get into our record predictions. Can Will Fuller play flag football this year instead of tackle? Is it possible?
if the stats count.
Yeah, I think he'd be lighting it up at flag football. I don't know though, because he'd probably break away and then he'd like pull his hamstring and then he'd be done. So like
he'd fall into a hole in the grass.
Yeah, he'd probably trip on something. Yeah, even if somebody pulls the flag and then he like pulls a groin or something. I don't know. Like he's always hurt. Like and
the guy's hamstrings are like guitar strings.
Yeah, exactly. Like we're trashing him. He's probably going to go on to be like an amazing receiver this year. But it's like you said, it's almost guaranteed to get that notification on your phone from ESPN Fantasy. Like
Fuller hamstring out for 4 weeks.
Like October 15th, and you're like, oh crap, that sucks because he has like monster weeks, and you're like, here we go, and then he pulls his hamstring, and you're like, oh, well, that sucks.
It's a love-hate relationship.
Yeah, now it's to be expected. And I honestly love him as a fantasy option though, as like if you're set the receiver position and just take a flyer and see what happens, because he's very few guys in the range he's being drafted in have the potential to be
wide receiver ones.
Yeah, that's true.
It's true. So, I'm not gonna draft him, but I do see I absolutely see what you're saying. Like if he ends up staying healthy for,
but he's not going to.
He's gonna be unreal, but he won't. He absolutely will not do that.
He's gonna get hurt for sure. So we could probably talk about how bad of a GM Bill O'Brien and how weak Fuller is. But any other final thoughts on the Texans?
Nope. I'm good.
So let's jump into our standing predictions then. Who wants to go first? Who feels confident enough to lead us off here with these standing predictions?
I'll Roman go first today.
All right.
you just want to rip on me after I mention these standings. All right. So like I mentioned earlier, I don't think I think the in-division games will be tough for the AFC South, but in terms of playoffs and playoff success or maybe compatibility, I think Houston is the winner here with a record maybe 11-5, 10-6. I think that's the only team that will make the playoffs from that division. And then Tennessee 8-8, Indianapolis 9-7, and unfortunately I have the Jaguars 2-14 with the first overall pick in the draft.
Wait, did you mean to say Colts 7-9 in third, or did you just get them confused?
Oh yeah, Tennessee 8-8, Indianapolis 7-9.
Okay, I was just confirming who was second, who was third. Yeah, so I don't agree with those rankings. But I'll jump into mine here. So what I had is I actually have the Colts winning the division. You probably could tell already by the way I was talking about them. I had them winning the division. I have them at actually 11-5. So much like your Texans. And then my second and thirds are very similar to yours as well, Roman. They're just not the same ones. Actually, Tennessee is the same. I have them currently at 8. Actually, call an audible here. I have them at 9-7. I think they're going to win some games. I like Ryan Tannehill. And then I have Houston at 8-8. And then I think the Jaguars are not a good team, so they're going to be down there at like a 4-12. I would say they're actually no 3-13. 3-13.
So I'll go ahead. Mine are very similar to Drew, so I won't spend too much time yet. I also think the Colts are an 11-5 football team. I don't get the hate from Roman. Great football team. And then I see the Titans at about 8-8 team. I thought about 9-7 as well, but I'm gonna go with 8-8. And then the Texans, I'll put them at 7-9. I don't think they're gonna be a playoff team. And then the Jaguars, which I am extremely high on, at 4-12.
Yeah, I think the Colts, sorry, Roman, I think the Colts are easily the best team in this division. And if you're right, all props to you, and the Texans are going to be really good this year. Just go back to this episode and rub it in my face. But the Texans, I think they could definitely be – I think the Texans and the Titans have a chance to sneak into that wild card spot. But I'm just not getting the Colts 7-9, not even a chance at the playoff spot. Hate from you, Roman. I think the Colts are a definite playoff team, regardless of whether they win the division or even if they make it in the wild card game.
I agree.
I'm willing to be wrong on the Colts, but I think the only reason that they will be not as competitive is because of Rivers. He hasn't won. The only time he won more than 11 games was, I believe, 2 years ago. They went 12-4, but besides that, it's been a long time since he won even 10 games or more. So to call the Colts 11-5, I think you'll need a good season from Rivers, and I don't know if that's going to be what you're looking for.
I don't know if you need a great season from Rivers, though, because I don't think he's going to be great because he's older now. But just look at their record last year. They were 7-9, and they had pretty much nothing at quarterback. And I think Rivers is at least going to get him something, and that's going to give him at least an extra. I could see them finishing 9-7 or 10-6 in that range. But like I said, I think they're definitely going to make the playoffs, or at the very least, be in the hunt for that wild card spot. But I see them winning the division because, in my opinion, they are the best team in this division.
They're clearly the best team in the division as well.
Wait, what record did you give Jacksonville? Because I wasn't really paying attention after you said Indianapolis would win the division.
Oh, I said 3-13.
I stopped paying attention.
I had 3-13 for Jacksonville. Yeah, and then Chris had a very high 4-12. But yeah. So I think this was honestly, I was kind of like, I don't really want to talk about this division because they're not super interesting. But I feel like this is it's very kind of controversial. We're all kind of all over the place with all these three, aside from the Jaguars, I guess. But do you guys have any final thoughts, any final pitches, Roman, to talk about how great the Texans are? Chris, talk about how great the Colts are before we kind of conclude this episode?
No, this was a fun one, guys. I'm very excited to get into our 8th and final division. This is a much more fun division to talk about in the AFC West. I mean, I think there's going to be controversy in this division as well, but I also think that there's some all four of these teams have some reasons to be optimistic.
Yeah, for sure. I think all four.
Yeah, I agree.
Roman, any final thoughts?
We'll see. That's all I gotta say. I'm honestly, I'm not super confident in those rankings, but I think just off clear competitiveness and past performances, I think it'll be a tough one. Tough to predict.
We'll see, though. I mean, we're both talking about how great Houston or Indianapolis is going to be, and it's probably going to be Tennessee that wins the division, or Jacksonville, and Gardner Minshew just shocks the world. Who knows? But as Chris mentioned there, the AFC West is going to be the final divisional breakdown that we're going to do. Super excited to do that one just because of I think all four of those teams are really fun to talk about, and obviously the Chiefs are probably going to win the division, but the other three teams all could make the playoffs here. So it's going to be a really fun division to talk about, so you're definitely going to want to check that one out. But again, we're the Zone Defense Podcast. Make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Spotify and Twitter at Zone Defense Pod, and also search us anywhere you listen to your podcast. Spotify, as I mentioned, Apple Podcasts, other channels like that. And we've done a ton of different episodes. As we already said, this is the 7th divisional breakdown. So if you missed any of our previous divisional breakdowns, we've done every division but the AFC West. So check those out. We also did a bunch of fantasy mocks, fantasy rankings, do's and don'ts, and a few NBA episodes as well. So check those out if you haven't already. But thanks for listening to this episode, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.